Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Peters. I'd like to welcome you to the Local History Show. Today's date is March the 1st, 1990, and our guest is Hugh Sims. This is part 2 of our interview with Hugh. We've been discussing Hugh's 3 books, The Sims Histories of Elgin County. Hugh, before we get back into the books, one thing that's always interested me about you is when I drive by your house on Forest Ave, you have all the wood carvings out front. Mm-hmm. There's a soldier, an Indian chief, a totem pole. Could you tell us, and I'm sure maybe some of our viewers have driven by and often wondered what these carvings signify in your front yard. Could you tell us a little bit about them and why you carved them?
Yeah, well, during the wartime I met the well-known Colonel Strum Galloway. And
he's from Aylmer, isn't he?
Yes, he was. I was at Wolsey at the time, and I seen this very smart-looking officer walking across the parade ground, and he just took my breath away. I admired him right from the start, you know, because he was handsome, and he was every bit a soldier. And one day when I was sitting there, I said, why don't I make an effigy of Colonel Strum Galloway? Well, that soldier is Colonel Strum Galloway. So he was my idol, really. And I wanted to be like him. I used to curl my mustache the same way as he did. But I never amounted any more than just a sergeant, that's all. But and then, of course, the Indian sitting in the front is Chief Wahoo. Chief Wahoo was a medicine man in the old Horton Market when I was a boy, and he was selling this cure-all medicine for $1 a bottle. It was mainly alcohol, of course, but he'd put on quite a dance, and he'd sell umpteen bottles. And I was thinking about old Chief Wahoo one day, so I thought I'd carve him out of wood, too. And, of course, the seaman reminds me of...
That's the seaman. He's got a pipe in his mouth,
yeah,
doesn't he? Yes?
Yeah. Well, when I was a young lad, I was on the North Sea on a ship called the Olympic. And we plied out of Ramsgate and up in the... fished off the Norwegian coast. And, of course, this old salt, he was at the pier at Ramsgate, and I couldn't take my eyes off because I had a bushy white beard, you know, and he was really typical old salt, you know. And I got it, why don't I cut him out? So I started. Then I did a totem pole. Somebody was on the Pacific as a sailor, and he brought back a totem pole for me, a souvenir from Vancouver. And I liked the idea, so I thought I'd carve a huge totem pole with the same idea, with a theme. My first totem pole was the creations of life, and of course I carved the base was it was a salmon at the base, and there was a bear cub on top of that. There was a man on top of the bear cub, and then his hands were outstretched, and he had a Canada goose on top of his hands, and then on the Canada goose was a butterfly. So I had the creation of life, and that was quite a thing. And a man came by one day, and he wanted it for his cottage up north, and I sold it to him, and I created the next one. It's called Good Over Evil, and it's the Thunderbird over the killer whale, and it's still standing there. But this is my second Thunderbird and the killer whale. The second one, a tourist bought that for his cottage, and so I had to create a third one, which I got today, you know. But it's just one thing after another, and there was an 1812 soldier at the back gate. He's on guard, and my love for history is, as you can see, and of course my love for the animals is well depicted in statues around there, and.
They're real works of art, Hugh. They really are. Boy, I imagine a lot of hours have gone into those.
Oh, yeah. But they were good hours, really, you know. I think when my mother died in '73, I felt terrible lonely, and I started creating a family of my own out of wood. And that's how it really started, really.
Well, you raised a real impressive family.
Yeah. My old battle putties and my old steel hat, Colonel Strum Galloway wears them. And so then inside the house there's ships, the Bessemer for one thing, and the what do they call it, Griffin. The Sal's ship, the Griffin, was in there, and and various ships into the house, and a lot of wood carvings inside the house. And so just before I come here today, I got a call from a gentleman who wants to replace the ears on a wooden giraffe. So he asked me all about it. I told him where to get the wood, and so I get. But I had good luck, really. I met Walter Stansel, the late Walter Stansel.
Well, Hugh, let's tell us a little bit about Walter Stansel. His name appears quite often through the books when you're looking at the early towns in Bayham Township. He seems like he must have been a real remarkable man. Could you tell us a little bit about Walter Stansel?
He had an uncanny memory, 97 years of age, and it was crystal clear, his memory was, though he was blind. But I used to go down every Thursday afternoon and read to him. And, of course, he just looked forward to that because, like I said, he had a lot of stories to tell if only somebody would listen. And I was a listener. And I admired Walt. And well,
what kind of did he just had a good memory of like people and places and events?
Yeah, tremendous. Well, for instance, he told me all about Spice's Mills. Now, no one knows anything about Spice's Mills, and it was a busy little settlement, and of course it was let's call it south of Stratfordville, and south and east of Stratfordville. And one day the boiler ran dry, and the boiler blew the mill all to pieces, and of course it got. And he recalled that particular day. And another thing I liked about Walter, he was full of unusual stories, like Saw Log Smith. And
who was Saw Log Smith?
Saw Log Smith was a character that lived back in the back roads around those days. One of his habits was stealing lumber, and a lot of the farmers would down a tree to clear the land, and when they come back next day, that log would be taken away and gone, and sold to a mill somewhere, and they figured it was old Saw Log Smith, and it said that Saw Log got so good at he could stand still in the middle of the road and hear a tree falling a mile away, and he says in one case Walt said that the lumberman was up there clearing the branches, and Saw Log was stealing the tree at the same time, so it was quite a character. And he was full of stories. Fortunately, I put them all down. I'm awful glad. One incident I always remember, he talked about an old couple lived at Eden, back east of Eden, and they had a log cabin, and it had one window and one door, and of course the old typical chimney fireplace. And this one particular case, the man and the wife had turned in for the night, and they had no clock in the house, and they relied on the sun to wake them up. And the local wags at Eden decided they'd sod that one window up. So they sodded the window up, and the old couple slept on and on and on until, of course, the fire went out in the fireplace. And the old man got up, and of course, by this time, the sun was going down in the west. And he says to his wife, "Mary, Mary, God has changed the world around." And it was always little stories like this. One case was a revival meeting, and the minister got up and he said, "All those who want to go to heaven, stand up." And this little lady kept seated, and Walt says she was a simple-minded but a good-hearted person, But so the congregation went to this woman. They said, "Don't you want to go to heaven like that?" And she said, "Oh no." She says, "All my friends are down here." So little simple stories, but it livened the day. And
yes,
I wrote them all down. In fact, I put them on tape. Walt's original stories on tape, and it's really something. I'm a millwright by trade, and I was a millwright by trade, but I thought I knew my work, my millwright trade, but Walt was a millwright of the old school, and he taught me things that I never knew how to do, like the layout of water wheel, how to build a dam, how to build a hearse mill. Hearst mill was so important in the old days when you had your big grindstones, because it was a unit within a unit, really, and it was made of heavy timber, and all your driving mechanism and your grindstones were all in that, because it was in the average mill, it would shake to pieces in one season. But a Hearst mill was a frame within a frame, like this. And when I go down to Port Rowan, I look at that old Colonel Bacchus mill, and if you go down in the basement and look up, you'll see the Hearst frame, and where your gears and your burr stones are all in that Hearst frame.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one thing I learned from Walter, how to build a dam. That's a very difficult thing, building a dam, you know. And I said, how did you do it? And he says, well, we just cleared the brush. And he said, pile the brush in the creek. And then we piled the earth on top of the brush. And he says, your brush served as a valve. The water still got through underneath like that, and it didn't wash the dam down. He says, then we drove, he says, our logs in front of the dam itself, and then the dam was created like that. You know, it was simple little things like this.
Yes.
You had to learn. And Walt was full of information galore. And he was a great wood carver. He had a lot of wood carvings all through the house, and I guess that's what attracted me to Walter, because I just loved to see people doing things like that.
Yes.
And we got it along pretty good together. And he died in 1981. He's buried in the old King Lake Cemetery. And I often went down there.
King Lake, that's in the Haldeman, Norfolk, isn't it?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's on the 45 highway, I think.
Yeah, that's where he originally come from, his folks. But I often visit the site where his father and his grandfather had the mill, a sawmill, and there's nothing there today, just what's called an embankment, and of course the mill pond's gone and so on like that.
Mm-hmm.
But tremendous stories come from that, and of course he was a shipwright. His father was a shipwright, and his grandfather was a shipwright. He worked in the Port Burwell shipyards.
Well, the Port Burwell, there was a lot of ships that were constructed down there, weren't there?
Tremendous. A lot of those ships, one sunk off at Tobermory, and one of them is still there. You know, they use it for sightseeing and so like that. But Walt was a mine of information. He told me more about the mysteries of the lakes than I ever come in my life. That's what got me interested in scuba diving, because I wanted to follow some of Walter's leads, you know, like that time, and it was exciting. I found a ship called the Albatross off of Port Talbot. It was just is it west? Yeah, it'll be west of Port Talbot. I found the remains of the Albatross. It was quite a good-sized schooner. It was half buried in silt out there. There was another ship out there, just a rib sticking up, and it was a big schooner. The bottom of Lake Erie is just covered with wrecks. Well, it was over 400 wrecks off Long Point, you know, went down. So it's a tremendous one. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think a lot of things that interest me was when I interviewed Andy Secord, many years ago, at least 40 some odd years ago. Andy's dad was Captain David Secord, and of course Andy told me his dad lost his life off of Long Point when his ship went down, and it was some weeks later that his body was found in the reeds there. And
well, didn't Secord tie himself to the mast of the ship?
Yeah, he was. Andy was an exceptional man. He had gone to Vancouver, and he located on an island, and he lived there for a good balance of his life, fishing and, of course, studying. He was quite a bibliophilic man, and he did an awful lot of reading and studying, and that's, I think, what attracted me to him, you know, because he was so much full of information like that. And then, of course, I was interested in the Secord family anyhow, and it was just like, I was just lucky, that's the whole thing, you know. I was on the ground floor, really. Andy Secord, I'll never forget him. He was a white-haired gentleman, always laughing. you know, you got pleasant memories like
Yes,
that.
oh, that's great.
Seacourt's Corners, that was quite a thing. That's Penn Hill Side Road now.
That's on number 3 highway at Penn Hill Side Road.
Yeah, yeah. There was a log cabin built there, and school and so on. And of course, all is gone. And then the old Tisdale home is still standing. It's across from the Penn Hill Side Road. You see a brick home there, 2.5 stories. And it's the old Tisdale place. It's quite a story. Major Matthew Tisdale was a very active Mason, and he's buried in the old English churchyard. And
there's a plaque inside the church to him too, isn't there?
Yeah. And my amazing part is Francis Tisdale, a descendant of Major Tisdale, has his Masonic, what they call it, button. Is made of solid gold, and still has the...
What, the square and compass?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you should.
What lodge did he belong to?
I don't know whether it was the old St. Thomas Lodge, what they call it, 44. Well, no, it wasn't
the early lodge
the
from
early
1818.
Lodge. Yeah, Captain Daniel Rafferty was a past master of it too, you know, and the Masonic order was very active down in here, and the fact is, when I researched across Elgin County, I found that the principal settlers of any settlement and founders of every settlement had connections with the Masonic order, and these Masonic members would get together, and organize for schools and churches. And
do you think that had something to do with the Masonic, your training in Masonry of, you know, doing good and trying to help your fellow man?
I do believe that, yes. Yes, it's some cases, it's some of the mysteries of Masonic order. You see some symbols cut into stone, and you recognize the secret symbols, you know, like that. Like
yes.
Frome has some stone.
Well, there's a symbol. I remember reading a newspaper article, and you found it at about maybe 3 or 4 different cemeteries, all spread out all through the county.
Yeah.
And were you ever able to identify that symbol? It's carved into some stones, and I forget, was it a triangle and...
within a circle.
A triangle and a circle.
Yeah. And well, there's one, of course, is the Delaware. It's got me. There's a Colonel Simpson buried in the old Delaware Cemetery, and his headstone is broken and it's laying flat on the ground, and it's got the all-seeing eye of God on it, and his Masonic apron is cut into it with the ties and the various Masonic symbols. And he was a officer in the British Army, and next to him is another Masonic headstone, erected in memory of a soldier, British soldier, and it's a circle with crossed swords and the moon and the stars cut in there. So it was a military order, Masonic military. All over Elgin County are mystical symbols that they turn up. But once you're trained to observe these things, you notice these things, like your lazy triangles and so on. Like the Edison, like at Vienna, they have what they call a lazy triangles, which is the symbol of God, you know, like that. So they had ways. Noah Cook at Richmond, he's buried in the old what they call it, East Hill.
The old Richmond Cemetery, that's where you go down the hill and up the other side. That's Henry Metcalf's buried in there too, I think.
Yeah, well what their part has got me is Noah headstone. He's got the square and the compass, but they're separated, you know, like that. But his brother Caleb Cook in the other cemetery across the valley, he's got the typical compass and square and the letter G, like that. I mean, they had the ways expressing this how. And this is what interests me very much, being trained to observe these things like that. And I'm awful thankful that I had the opportunity to have a Masonic education, which helps me a great deal.
Yes, it's interesting.
It does, you know, because you meet men who wouldn't even pass the time of the day, but since you're a brother of the craft, they'll take time out to help you in your work. And, and this has been a big thing for me too, you know. And
you're getting back to some of the villages and in Elgin County. On Highway 73, about 4 miles north of Port Bruce, is the village or the settlement of Dunboyne. It was originally called Nickerson's Corners.
Yeah.
There was a post office established in 1881. There was a cheese and a butter factory.
Right.
But there's a couple interesting things that, I guess, little stories. One is Dr. Perry Doolittle, who invented an early bicycle, or he was...
Yeah, the Perry hub.
The Perry hub?
Yeah. It was really something. It was it was a brake and hub or driving unit all in one hub, like that. That was his plan, of course, And he was always inventing things, and he was an incredible man.
Well, he purchased a car, an old Winton, from a man named Moody in Hamilton, and wasn't Doolittle involved in the foundings of the Ontario Motor League?
That's right. Yeah, he was instrumental. Yeah. Dunboyne has a tremendous history, really.
There's an interesting building in Dunboyne. It stands at the southwest corner, and it looks like just an ordinary garage or a shed, but it has a high tower.
Yeah,
it looks like a tower that was used maybe as I think of the fire hall in St. Thomas for drying hoses. Now, what was that building all about, Hugh?
Well, Thayer built that. Mr. Thayer lived there. He was the one that founded the Thayer service stations, and of course that was what they call a hose drying house, and it's still standing. I should photograph that. Really, that's not much left there, but the old brown house was across the road from it was a huge brick house. It was set up on the what they call it, northeast corner, and it was in terrible state when I was young. But Nicholas Carter Brown was quite a character.
Was he?
Oh man!
Anything that comes to mind about him?
Well, his headstones. He married many times, and every time he'd marry, he'd have his wife's head cut into the headstone and if she bore a child, he'd have the child cut into the headstone. And he married 3 times, and the last person he married, of course, is still there. She bore no children, so she sits alone by herself on his headstone. Well, any children, And
where is he buried?
In the old Dunboyne Cemetery.
That's just a little east of the
church
settlement. Yes.
Yeah.
I must go in and have a look at that.
Yeah, you did. I wrote quite an article on it in the story of Dunboyne, and another interesting person buried in there is Lloyd Graves.
Well, I was going to ask you because we're going to talk about Mount Salem next.
Yeah.
Mount Salem is located at the intersection of County Road 45 and County Road 40. It used to be known as Hamburg or Louisville.
Hamburg.
But Lloyd Graves, he was born in Kentucky. He was an escaped slave.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about Graves?
Well, he smuggled across the lake. He stowed away in a ship, and of course he arrived at Port Stanley, and he was greeted by, I forget the name of him.
George Penwarden.
Yeah, George made him right at home and welcome in Canada, of course, and felt sorry for him. And he got him started, really, and he settled in St. Thomas. He operated a dray, had a dray business, and he attended the old Negro Baptist Church, which at the bottom of Talbot Street Hill, where the bridge is now standing. He attended that, and of course he lost his first wife, Lloyd Graves did, and he bore children. I remember, I think it was 4 children he bore. He brought forth, and when she died, he moved into Mount Salem, and he took up what they call a market garden and also care of the hotel at Mount Salem. But he lived over 100 years of age. And
I think 104 he
104,
was.
Yeah.
He died in 1928.
But anyhow, when he got settled in St. Thomas, his old slave owner had come to St. Thomas, asked him to come back to the plantation as a free man. But already Lloyd Graves had liked the fact that he had freedom under the British flag, and he preferred to stay in Canada,
yes.
which he did, which I admired him for. But that was a strange thing there. I had a psychic experience with Lloyd Graves, and I had a feeling to come over him one day. I was standing at Dunboyne, and I became extremely excited. And my heart started going mad on me, and I couldn't understand why I was so excited, And I looked at it, and it kept bothering me. And as I thought I took down the dates of Lloyd graves, and I went to a microfilm. And boy, what a story it turned out to be! It just you have a hunch.
It just hit you in the cemetery.
Yeah, you had a hunch, you know. You're onto something, and I found it so many times, you know. And you've got these hunches you get once in a while, a gut feeling, in other words, that you're onto something, and it usually turns out right, you know. And I remember the one church I used to visit at LaSalle. It was a Roman Catholic church. It's a beautiful old church. You know, people should visit at LaSalle. I mean, go inside, it's so beautiful. But the minute I got into it, I became extremely excited. I realized it was something that really, you know, and but it's just, that's the way you know. I feel like why I know that I'm psychic is I get excited over something, and I try to find out why I'm so excited.
Yes.
Usually it turns out pretty good story, you know. So I mean, Lloyd Graves was quite a story, and of course the Tuffords are buried there. Noble Tufford, he lives on the road Fingal outside of Middlemarch, and of course his ancestors are all buried in the old Dunboyne Cemetery.
Are they?
Yeah. So I mean, there's so many stories in there. It's like everyone wants to tell you a story.
That's right.
You know, that is it. You know, and I often go by a cemetery like that, and I you know, I feel like there's so much that I still got to learn.
Oh, there is. It's endless what you could learn. You know, if you went into a cemetery and if you wrote a story on every one of the persons buried there, you know, the amount of material that you could publish would just be endless.
The people at Norfolk, and they come to me and they said, would I do the same thing for Norfolk as I did for Elgin County? I said, I've only got one lifetime. You know,
that's right. This has been your lifetime.
Yeah, I've only got one lifetime, and it's. I mean, why don't somebody else pick up the story of Norfolk down in there? Because it's full of stuff.
And they would even have more. They have 30, 40 years more history than Elgin County has.
Long Point Settlement, I guess.
Yes.
So. Oh boy.
Well, Hugh, going south from Mount Salem down County Road 40, now we're back on the lake road again. We come to Grovesend.
Oh, Grovesend.
There's a number of interesting things. I guess one in particular, a very famous man, George McKinnon Wrong, who was a professor of history at the University of Toronto. Yeah. He was born in Grovesend in 1860. One of the, again, talking about famous individuals from Elgin County.
Yeah.
But there was a murder that took place down there. That was the Marshall Pigott murder.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, Hugh?
Well, they found his body out in the lake. Really, it was what led the discovery was a sock washed up on the shore, and they found the body of Marshall Pigott inside this kettle. It's like a sugar kettle, and they traced down the fact that Havelock Smith had rented this boat for nefarious purposes, and they brought him up 3 times on trial, but they didn't have enough evidence to convict him. You know, they knew he had committed this murder, but there was no way they could prove it, and it was it still is unsolved, really, the old Marshall Pigott case. But
well, they brought in the great Canadian detective Murray. He came in and helped in that investigation, didn't he?
Yeah, he was quite a man, that Murray. You know.
He got his start in St. Thomas. He started working on the Canada Southern as a detective for the railway.
Yeah, uncanny man. Yeah, he solved the Hendershot welder case. Well, the Hendershot murder case. He had the body exhumed. It was at Fingal, and he had the body exhumed, and he found X marks around the neck, and he put it down, you know, and of course you know what happened then. But it was all over a $2,000 insurance. That's all it was.
Well, just talking about, you know, we're on to the Hendershot and Welter murder, and it's in the news again. Yeah. William Welter and John Hendershot were hung for the murder of the Hendershot man, and they're buried behind the courthouse. And now the new owner of the courthouse has made application to have those bodies exhumed. Hugh, do you think that there's some question as to where those bodies actually are? Can you tell us, you interviewed a man that witnessed the hanging. Can you tell us what he told you about the hanging of Hendershot and Welter?
Yeah, the late Charlie Corbett. He told me he had climbed a tree and witnessed the hanging. He saw the two men mount the gallows. They were dressed in black suits and white shirts. And he says, the Hendershot was a bigger man, yeah. And of course, they dropped through the traps like that. But so Charlie Corbett, one afternoon, I was near the courthouse, and he come and showed me where they were buried, like that. He pointed it out, but he said that they were placed in a rough box and quick-limed. So if the only thing that could stand quicklime would be the teeth. And so if they find the teeth, they found what remains of the Hendershot and Welter in that case. But I knew the juror. I went to the people who was on the jury at the time. I interviewed the late John Holden. He lived at Fingal, and he was a member of the jury. And old John and I went down to the woods called the Wardell Woods at Middlemarch, yeah. And he showed me the exact spot where young Hendershot was killed, and so I got first-hand information from him because he was in the jury, And so this was a big help, really,
Yes.
And of course, old John Holden's gone.
Well, I understand. Well, you know where the murder took place, and I understand. Talking Nob Tufford, I guess he knows where the murder, the site of the murder took place.
Yeah.
I've often wanted to, go meet him and have him take me out there just to see the spot.
Well, he's a very approachable man, Noble is, He was a war pilot during the war, bomber pilot, and he's seen action overseas, and we'd get together once in a while and, as airmen, and we talk about the past. But I'm very fortunate, Stephen, of meeting the people at the time. I think this was a damn good thing for me to go out and meet the people. That way, you got the first-hand information from the people itself. It wasn't second-hand information, but and that's what helped a great deal, I knew all like Dr. James Curtis of the, I knew all the Curtis family, and of course that was a big lift, He took me one day and showed me the old Slethio Curtis home. It's long gone, of course. It sat in the field, but I made a sketch of it at the time. But it was just it was what made me do it. I don't know.
Well, we're eternally grateful that you have done it, Hugh. Back to Grovesend, Stalter's Gully.
Oh yeah.
There's supposed to be Stalter's Gully is supposed to be haunted.
Well, it was over a little girl. So it was a girl in love with a fellow, and the parents forbade it. And of course, she went one night, went out of the house and drowned, committed suicide in the old pond up in the upper reaches of Stalter's Gully. There was a little pond, and they found her body, and they brought her body back to the house. It was near the Stalter's Gully. And that night there was strange goings on. The window was thrown open by unseen forces, and they brought the body and they laid it on the bed. The bed had a mattress of ropes, like they used to do.
An old rope bed, yes.
Yeah, rope bed to dry her out, of course. But they had an awful time with keeping windows closed and doors closed. So one man volunteered to up in the bedroom, and he placed his back against the bedroom door, and he was thrown across the room by a titanic force that he really frightened him. And no one slept that night because there was strange goings on, and when of course the body was removed, of course, and buried, but that ended the ghosts. But another ghost appeared on Nova Scotia Street for years and years after. This gentleman would walk down Nova Scotia Street on a moonless night, and people would encounter him, and they would be frightened. The horses would be frightened, and of course they'd be frightened, and he'd disappear. And this went on for years, and I reasoned that this man was the lover of the girl, and he was broken-hearted, and so I kept my search up, and I found that he was buried in that little cemetery close by, and it dawned on me that he stopped haunting when he died, and that way into the story of the ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
But there was tragedy all the way down there. The Stoller's Galley was also the grave of a huge mastodon in there too. It had 7-foot tusks. It was found in there, and it was removed. So
where's that mastodon today? Do you know?
I can't remember what's the. I think I've written it.
Is that the one that's in Niagara Falls?
Well, no, that's the one from Paynes Mills, Niagara Falls.
I've seen there's a museum in Niagara Falls, and there's a mastodon, and I remember it was from Elgin. It was found in Elgin County.
Yeah, Paynes Mill on the Berdan farm. They found it, and it had 7-foot tusks too. It was a big creature,
Mammoth.
But the one down, of course, in Norfolk was called Norfolk Giant. It had 12-foot tusks, so it was a huge creature, But I reasoned, of course, there was a huge herd in here trying to migrate across it to the south, but what stopped them was Lake Erie, and of course the lakes. Of course, it wasn't Lake Erie then; it was Lake Warren, and they couldn't get across. And some died out out in the lake. The ice gave away, and they plunged to their death, and some died in our swamps. So we have over 40 some odd skeletons of the mastodon in this area. So
it's really amazing.
It was a huge herd, really a huge. That's a good thing about knowledge is that, like my geological knowledge, and
you've done a lot of work into the geological history of Elgin County too, haven't you?
Yeah, it gives you. You're never bored when you look at the landscape. You can see it.
Well, like it's Sparta, the Sparta Ridge, the Fruit Ridge Road. Tell us about that, Hugh.
Yeah, the moraines. Yeah, the huge ridge. Yeah, that Fruit Ridge Road. That Fruit Ridge, was the original shorelines of Lake Warren. Port Stanley, during the time of Lake Warren, was under 200 and some odd feet of water, the site of Port Stanley. So you can imagine how immense Lake Warren was.
How many years ago are we? Thousands of years
10,000.
10,000?
Yeah, 10,000. And where you can see this is the gravel pits. Near there, you can see, like one at Pleasant Valley, you can see the old shorelines of the old ancient shores. Lake Warren's, how it washed up on there and left. And the marl, of course, is there, and a little marine life and all like that. So it must be an immense drama, because the only islands there was St. Thomas Island, which took in the Yarmouth Center, and then of course the ridge, the Sparta Ridge was an island, and then it was a mass of water right to Westminster Ridge, which
on Regina Mundi there, where it's high.
That was huge. That was 1,000 feet above sea level, and Lake Wami was where London, Ontario now is, sitting on the bottom of the glacier lake, like that. And Lake Wami stretched from Lake Huron right to Kitchener. And it was a huge body. The Westminster Ridges were formed by the movement of the glacier ice, which built these ridges. So you can imagine how gigantic it was, really. But for a long, long time, there was no living creature. And then your Paleolithic man came in, and he lived on the high ridges. And evidence of that was found by myself in 1935. When I come across an elith on the Sparta Ridge.
What's an elith?
An early stoneworking tool, and it proves the fact that he had settled there to hunt and to live and like that. And of course, it's a tremendous drama. The Sparta Ridge is just like a story when it opens up to me, it tells me that story is tremendous. This is what I think it's so wonderful is having knowledge, because you enjoy yourself so much.
And you can always learn. It's never ending, Hugh.
Never ending, no. And I have a terrible sense of curiosity.
Gets you in trouble sometimes, I know. I'm the same way.
Yeah. I want to know why things happen.
And that's part of the problem I know myself. You want to find the answer, and boy, you just keep going and going and going. You put everything else aside because you just have to find that answer out. And it's, boy, that's one thing about history. It's one way you can waste time really easily.
Yeah.
You can put your other work aside and just work away at the history.
Well, you know, before Don Cousins come in the picture, I was all by myself in my little world. And fortunately, I had geological knowledge that's helped me a great deal. But when Don come along, it was nice to have somebody come along to do research, and I was doing it all by myself. See, Dr. James Coyne had passed away, and of course, Alan Lewis was gone, and that left me all. There was nobody to carry on, and no one seemed to be interested in preserving history in those days. There was so much, you know, lost. And wartime was a criminal thing, you know, because we lost our Crimean cannons at Pinnacle Park, our German howitzers.
Where did they go?
In the melting pot, you know. That's a thing, you know. Think about all those things destroyed, and they were driving for paper, and of course a lot of people brought out old letters and books, and they went into the mills, of course, to be converted to something else. So we lost an awful lot during the wartime like that.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. So it was kind of refreshing when Don Cousins come along to pick up the, you know, we're left off, and I think Don's done a wonderful job, and I'm awful glad that you know, he's deeply interested. You know,
there's a lot of people that have, you know, yourself. I look at like somebody like George Thorman, Wayne Patton, Howard Mills.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many of you that have worked so hard. Our good friend George Canoy, boy, you know, in the archaeological history at. You know, it's great. You know, we're really fortunate in Elgin County to have had people like you and those others that have worked so hard in preserving our history for future generations.
That's right. Howard,
it's making my job a lot easier for me. All the work that you people have done.
Well, Howard Mills has done a tremendous job in the diaries or in the directories and stuff like that.
Yes.
He's done a tremendous job, and I hope one of these days all that stuff that he's done is preserved for the general public, you know, because he's done it.
Oh, he has, boy.
Big job. And Howard and I were always interested. We're always talking about stuff like that, you know. We're always interested. He's helped me a great deal. I've had problems, and I'd go to Howard, and he'd give me the answers. Like that. So
it's the same with me. He's a real resource person, and he has everything right at his fingertips too, which is so good. There
was a monk once said, "No man is an island." And it's so true. You know, we have to rely on each other.
Yes.
Because we can't contain all the information. There's, you know, I mean, we have to go to somebody else to help us once in a while.
That's right.
You know, yeah, Henry Ford said once that if you want anything done, you go to the busiest man in the shop. Well, that goes with a lot of stuff, you know. So
that's true. Hugh, jumping back to some of our places, Lakeview. The home of the McConnell Nursery, the McConnell family, early settlers. But one thing that, the reason I ask you about Lakeview is, and I'm sure some of our younger viewers will remember or know of this, there's two big stone gates down there. And they're known as Hell's Gates. And it was, those... I've heard that there was a big house back there. Can you tell me why these two big stone gates are there?
Yeah, they had it was a main gateway into the estate, and it was a beautiful French chateau back there, built on the side of the lake, of course. And of course, when the Depression come, the fortunes of the family was wiped out, and for years the old chateau was used for picnics. The grounds were used for picnics and stuff like that. And Lake Erie gradually reclaimed the old chateau. It fell into the lake and disappeared, like a lot of things, like a place called Devonport. It dropped into the lake. That was
just east or west of Port Bruce, wasn't it?
Yeah, west of Port Bruce. Yeah. Henry Daly's dream dropped in the lake, and he had plans of building an inner harbor and a town by itself just above the Port Bruce. And when his fortunes died, he went bankrupt. He went back to England, and he joined in the Australian gold rush and recovered his fortune,
Okay.
and of course, he stayed in Australia. But there's a little place down in Australia called Devonport, so I'm often wondering if it's a...
Boy, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
It'd be worth pursuing.
Yeah,
to
well,
find out.
I asked my Australian friend if he would pursue it for me, but I hadn't received word about it yet. But,
Well, another place, Stratfordville, known as McNaughtonville or Sandytown.
yeah.
It was a real area of that whole Bayham area was. There was a lot of oak and pine, wasn't there?
Yeah.
A real lumbering area.
Yeah, well, the whole Bayham Township was what I call a lumberman's dream, actually. And at one time there was 26 mills on Otter Creek operating, and they were actually what they call vertical sawmills, vertical blade sawmills. And in 1851, the road was surveyed from Tilsonburg to Port Burrell.
Is that Highway 19 today?
Yeah, it was planked from one end to the other, and of course, these mills had the contract of turning out these planks for this number 9, what we call number 19 now. But what interested the British Navy was that the Bayham had these pine trees, and there was a great demand for masts and spars in the British shipyards, and so there was a big demand for them. You know, they were shipped to England and sold for $5 a foot, so they were really valuable. And actually, there was a lot of Americans come in, and they were lumberjacks, and they worked all through Bayham, felling trees, and of course your shipbuilding industry was at Port Burrell was going full gun then too, and there was great demand for knee bends. You know, that's a ship's tree trunk that's shaped like a knee, and they were fashioned into what they call bow pieces and ribs, of course, and transoms and so like that. It was so actually it was a great thing. Robert McNaughton, who was an Irishman, he was a member of the Masonic Order, and his headstone is still there in the old Stratfordville Cemetery, and with his compass and square carved in it, you know. But he was quite a character. He had an idea of forming his own settlement called McNaughtonville, and he had a store built and mills. He had 2 mills going, and he had a sign built painted McNaughtonville. And of course, one night, according to Walter Stansel, the local wags got the hold of the sign and threw it in the middle pond, and so it ceased to be McNaughtonville. But McNaughtonville really died when Bob McNaughton passed away. He died a very early death, but he asked the lumberjacks if he'd like to have, if he brought some women from Ireland, would they go for it? And they all agreed. So he went to Ireland and brought back a shipload of women. And they landed at Port Burrell, and of course the lumberjacks went wild. And Robert McNaughton, he married one of the girls himself. She's buried in the old Stratfordville Cemetery, but it was a lumberjack's dream, really, all the way through.
Well, staying with Stratfordville, we've centered around that area was a band of thieves, I guess you'd call them, and I always liked the name of them, the Bayham Lambs.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the Bayham Lambs?
Oh, it was 2 men really started that, and then they would burglarize houses and hold people up in daylight and so on like that. They were into all kinds of problems. And one was Marcus Hubbard, and the other one was, I forget the other Hubbard name, and there was 3 when they started out, and they robbed the castle. It was 2 bachelors at Eden, and they broke in the castles and to rob them like that. And
well, what didn't a couple of them they were captured, and didn't they escape from the courthouse or the jail yard in St. Thomas?
Yeah, Marcus Hubbard and McCarthy. They climbed the walls and escaped through the Mandeville woods. And of course, they were eventually captured, of course. But I looked at walls, and I don't know how they ever climbed it, but they did. Yeah, there's quite a lot of here. Here's the one I got here about the Bayham Lambs. It was from the Tillsonburg Liberal in the year 1887. Constable Lipset of Straffordville passed through the town of Tillsonburg twice during the past week with the alleged members of the gang of burglars that had been committing daring robberies throughout the southern counties. Mr. Barnum, Vandenberg, Walter Smuck, and Joseph Leach had been lodged in the Elgin County Jail on suspicion of being implicated in the robberies on Tuesday evening of the last week. As Mr. Axford, who lived a mile east of Strathville, was returned from Glenmire and was a short distance from his house, he met two men who asked him if he could change a $10 bill, which of them held out in his hand. Mr. Axford pulled out what money he had and to see if he could oblige the men, but he did not have enough, and told them so. They asked him how much he had, at the same time making a grab for his money in Mr. Axford's hand. But this gentleman was too quick for them. He ran home and followed closely by the two men. Axford outran them. So this was one of the typical cases what was happening in the back days like that.
Boy, they must have had the people, the settlers in that Bayham Township area, very scared that you never knew if this band of thieves was going to show up and rob you or not.
They reigned supreme until Police Chief Fluin come from Portstown. He investigated, and he put his own undercover agent in there, and of course that broke the gang up really, you know. But the three well-known toughs. Here's the item here. Three known toughs was Albert Thomas, the young man who had turned state evidence, confessed that having had a hand in the murder of Lewis N. Stillwell, which was murdered at Eden, and one of the best known and feared of Bayham Lambs, and Clarkson Haney, who was charged with larceny in Bayham, and an escape punishment by peaching on his pals, and was arrested at Chase, Michigan, a few days ago, charged with burglarizing the residence of aged couple and tortured them. This following is from the Tillsonburg Liberal, dated June 23rd, 1888. And this went along, and the most mysterious thing I come across, and this is when I was interviewing some old gentlemen down in Bayham, and this is what they heard. A large steel corset was found concealed in the mattress of Franklin Carnes in the St. Thomas jail on Monday, which he evidently intended to convert into a saw to enable him to escape. He escaped from the same jail 7 years ago while waiting transference to Kingston to serve 5 years. Now this is the one thing that got me. One person who was involved was Elgin Griffin of Griffin's Corners, and this is what happened. This is what I picked up. On November the 25th, 1901, the life of Elgin Griffin come to a sudden and terrible end when he was burnt to death through an exploding oil lamp. Now, I said this to old Walt, and he looked at me in a strange way, and I say, was it an accident or an act of revenge? The local old-timers shake their heads and compress their lips. It's one of the mysteries of Griffin's Corners, you know.
So, well, we're down to 1 minute, Hugh.
Okay.
Boy, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, or not talking to you, listening to you. Again, as you said earlier, that's how you learn, by listening, and I've learned a great deal today. And I want to have you back again because, boy, we just scratched the surface today. And I think there's lots of unlocked mysteries in Elgin County. There's so much more that can be done. And I'd like to thank you again,
Yeah.
and just remind our viewers that we have of Hugh's books, the 3-volume history of Elgin County, Sims' History of Elgin, and again that these books are available at the Elgin County Library and also at Coffee's News Depot. The book, the hardcover, sells for $17.50, and the softcover is $15. And I would encourage our viewers to purchase a copy of these books. Hugh, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very
And
much.
I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah.
To the cameramen and to the people that have helped produce this show, thank you very much. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye now.